will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2415.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2415, a bill to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 11 Dock Street in Pittston, Pennsylvania as the Trooper Joshua D. Miller Post Office Building.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material in the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 2415, introduced by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta, would designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 11 Dock Street in Pittston, Pennsylvania, the Trooper Joshua D. Miller Post Office Building. This bill is co-sponsored by the entire Pennsylvania State Delegation and was favorably reported by the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform on the 3rd of November. Mr. Speaker, while we've considered multiple bills this afternoon to designate postal facilities for fallen military heroes, H.R. 2415 gives us the opportunity to those who wear a different kind of uniform, our country's law enforcement officers. Specifically, this legislation would name the post office in Pittston, Pennsylvania for Joshua Miller, a Pennsylvania state trooper who was shot and killed in the line of duty on June 7, 2009. A veteran of the Marine Corps, Trooper Miller was attempting to save a 9-year-old boy from a man who had kidnapped the child at gunpoint when he was tragically shot by the suspect. For going above and beyond a police officer's duty to protect and serve, I thank Trooper Miller and all those who wear the badge on a daily basis for their selfless service and dedication to our communities. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would now like to yield as much time as he may consume to my distinguished colleague from the state of Pennsylvania, the sponsor of this legislation, Mr. Barletta.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I'd like to thank the gentleman from Texas for those kind remarks. Mr. Speaker, I rise tonight to honor the life and remember the sacrifice of Pennsylvania State Police Trooper Joshua D. Miller of Pittston. Trooper Miller was shot and killed on June 7, 2009, while attempting to apprehend a kidnapper who took a 9-year-old boy from his mother at gunpoint and fled. As he and his partner were trying to apprehend the suspect, Trooper Miller was shot in the upper chest and in the leg. While they returned fire, another state trooper and a local law enforcement officer were able to smash the window in the kidnapper's vehicle, grab the 9-year-old boy, and carry him to safety. Trooper Miller was flown to a hospital, but he died from his wounds. Josh was born on June 13, 1974, a son of Walter Miller of Pittston and Peggy Miller of Plymouth. Josh graduated from Pittston Area High School class of 1992. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in 1993, serving honorably and achieving the rank of corporal before his discharge. Upon separation from active duty, Josh worked at the Monroe County Correctional Facility. He enrolled at Lackawanna Junior College and attended the Act 120 course. Upon graduation, Josh joined the Tunkhannock Borough Police Department in 1999. He worked there until September 2002, when he joined the Pennsylvania State Police. Trooper Miller first worked at the Bethlehem Barracks, then at the Swiftwater Barracks in Monroe County. While there, he was selected to be a member of an elite unit that conducted aggressive patrols. Trooper Miller took pride in training new troopers and hoped to instill his work ethic in them. In 2001, Josh met his wife Angela, and they were married in October 2005. He had 3 daughters, Justine, Brianna, and Jocelyn. After his death, thousands attended his viewing. More than 1,700 law enforcement officers from across the country attended his funeral. During the service, then Governor Ed Rendell awarded Trooper Miller a posthumous Medal of Honor. On the day he was shot and killed in the line of duty, Trooper Miller sent an email to a colleague. In it, he wrote, quote, "I will not let anything happen to my brothers on my watch." After years of dedicated service as a U.S. Marine, as a law enforcement officer, and as a Pennsylvania State Police trooper, Trooper Miller ended his final watch on June 7, 2009. He died while saving a boy from a kidnapper with a gun. He died serving his community, his Commonwealth, and his country. That is why I encourage you to support H.R. 2415 and name the United States Postal Service facility at 11 Dock Street, Pittston, Pennsylvania, the Trooper Joshua D. Miller Post Office Building. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield myself such time as I may consume, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 2415, a bill to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 11 Dock Street in Pittston, Pennsylvania, as the Trooper Joshua D. Miller Post Office Building. The measure before us was authored by Congressman Lou Barletta and co-sponsored by all the members of the Pennsylvania delegation. H.R. 2415 was favorably reported out of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee by unanimous consent on November the 3rd, 2011. Pennsylvania State Trooper Joshua D. Miller spent his life serving his country, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and his local community. Born to Walter and Peggy Miller in 1974, Trooper Miller enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1993. Upon discharge, he returned to Pennsylvania and joined the Taconic Bureau Police Department before becoming a Pennsylvania State Trooper. Trooper Miller was a member of an elite unit of troopers assigned to handle the most dangerous cases. He made the ultimate sacrifice in the line of duty while trying to rescue a 9-year-old boy who had been kidnapped at gunpoint and was being held hostage. The young boy was ultimately released and returned safely to his family. On the day of his death, Trooper Miller wrote in an email to a colleague, and I quote, "I will not let anything happen to my brothers on my watch." End of quote. His life exemplified his commitment to serving his community and protecting his fellow officers. Mr. Speaker, I ask that we pass H.R. 2415 to recognize the life and sacrifice of Pennsylvania State Trooper Joshua D. Miller. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I have no additional speakers at this time. I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
Since we have no additional speakers, Mr. Speaker, we would yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to join me in strong support of H.R. 2415, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back, all time having expired. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2415? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Speaker, I object to the vote that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Okay. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1791.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1791, a bill to designate the United States Courthouse under construction at 101 South United States Route 1 in Fort Pierce, Florida, as the Alto Lee Adams Sr. United States Courthouse.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, and the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 1791.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
H.R. 1791 would designate the United States Courthouse currently under construction at 101 South United States Route 1 in Fort Pierce, Florida, as the Alto Lee Adams Sr. United States Courthouse. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rooney, for introducing this bipartisan legislation. I also want to thank the 21 co-sponsors from the state of Florida for supporting this bill. Chief Justice Alto Lee Adams Sr. honorably served his community and the state of Florida throughout his life. Chief Justice Adams was born in 1899 and was raised on a farm in Walton County, Florida. After graduating from the University of Florida College of Law in 1921, he practiced law in Fort Pierce, Florida from 1924 to 1938. He was then appointed as Circuit Court Judge for St. Lucie County after Floridians adopted an amendment to add a 7th justice on the state Supreme Court in 1940. Governor Fred Cohn appointed Justice Chief Adams to the newly created seat. Chief Justice Adams served on the court from 1940 until 1951, and he was Chief Justice from 1949 until 1951. He sat on the bench again from 1967 until 68. Outside his judicial career, Chief Adams was active in his community. In 1937, he served as the president of Florida State Elks Association. From 37 to 38, he served as the vice chair of the State Welfare Board. Chief Adams also devoted time to local business interests in St. Lucie County, including Citrus Groves and Bass Motors. He began a cattle ranch in 1937, which is still run by the Adams family. The ranch now encompasses over 65,000 acres in 3 counties. I believe it's appropriate that we honor Chief Justice Adams' dedicated service for community in the state of Florida. I support passage of this legislation and urge my colleagues to do the same. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady, California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1791 and am pleased today to speak in support of the bill that names the courthouse located in Fort Pierce, Florida, as the Alto Lee Adams Sr. United States Courthouse. Well, I may seem redundant because my colleague has already mentioned most of the accomplishments of Judge Adams. The fact that he was born in 1899 in Florida and was in the U.S. Navy, that he graduated from the University of Florida Law School in 1921 and began legal practice in Fort Pierce in 1924. Then from practicing law for nearly 14 years, Judge Adams was appointed, as was pointed out, to the Florida State Circuit Court in 1938. That's 2 years after I was born. After serving as a Circuit Court judge, he served as a member of the Florida Supreme Court, again, 1940 to 1951, and then from 1967 to 1968, recognized as the first graduate of the University of Florida to serve as a justice and later Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court. He was very well noted for his short, clear opinions, as well as the several books he published and, of course, the legal articles he authored. In 1974, he was awarded the honor of being a distinguished alumnus of the University of Florida. And in addition to his judicial duties, he also served as an active member of his community, serving, as was pointed out, president of the Florida State Elks Association and also the vice chair of the State Welfare Board. Because of his exemplary career in public service, both in the military and the Florida Supreme Court, I urge my colleagues to join us in supporting H.R. 1791, which does name the U.S. Courthouse at 101 South United States Route 1 in Fort Pierce, Florida, as the Alto Lee Adams Sr. United States Courthouse. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rooney.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the gentleman from California. Today is a great day for the residents of Fort Pierce, Florida, and the Treasure Coast. Over 2 decades ago, the late Congressman Tom Lewis and his district director, Ann Decker, started the long process of making the courthouse a reality. The countless hours of dedication and work by those who followed him are now being rewarded with the construction of a new courthouse. I was greatly honored that one of my first official events as Congressman was to participate in the historic groundbreaking for this building. I introduced this legislation to honor the distinguished life and career of the late Florida Supreme Court Chief Justice Alto Lee Adams by naming the new courthouse in his memory. This courthouse will fill a vital role for the city of Fort Pierce, bringing much-needed jobs and investment to the community with this greatly needed new federal courthouse. It is only fitting that the courthouse be named in honor of a man who himself gave so much to his community and the legal community of the state of Florida. Chief Justice Alto Lee Adams attended the University of Florida College of Law in 1921. As was mentioned, practiced law in Fort Pierce, was appointed Circuit Court Judge for St. Lucie County, and was appointed to the State Supreme Court in 1940 by then-Governor Fred P. Cone. He served as a justice on the Florida Supreme Court from 1940 to 1951 and Chief Justice from 1949 to 1951. Chief Justice Adams believed it was important to give back to his community. His service to St. Lucie County served as an example to his children and those who knew him. And Mr. Speaker, I can say, having spoke to some of the Adams family before I took the floor today, they are thrilled that this bill is being brought up as we speak. In addition to the distinguished legal career, Justice Adams started a successful cattle ranch named the Adams Ranch in St. Lucie County, just had their bull auction last week, and it's still run by the Adams family. Judge Adams set a standard for integrity and community service that lives on today, and I believe it's only fitting that this new courthouse is named in his honor. I'm proud to sponsor this bill, and I ask my colleagues for their support in naming this courthouse. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having no further speakers, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
All time having expired, the question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1791? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Speaker,
California.
I object to the vote that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 p.m. today.
So